Hey there, fellow thrill seekers and believers in the unknown. Ready to dive into the realm of the supernatural? Get ready to be spooked and amazed as I bring you 12 true paranormal ghost stories that will send shivers down your spine. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you won't miss out on any of our spine-tingling adventures. Let's get started, if you dare. Alright, buckle up because what I'm about to tell you is absolutely mind-boggling and still gives me the creeps. Now, I'm not one to buy into all that spooky paranormal stuff, but after what went down last night, I'm questioning everything. Before you start reading this, remember, I'm not pulling your leg, and I wasn't under the influence. My friend Gina can vouch for me, she saw it too. So, I'm a senior at this relatively small college in Wisconsin. And our school's kinda famous for throwing these wild parties deep in the woods. It's like a tradition to keep the campus police off our backs. Now, here's the kicker. I've never attended one of these forest shindigs because anxiety has been my unwelcome companion for years. However, after 2 years of therapy and some meds, I decided I couldn't graduate without experiencing at least one of these legendary parties. So, I talked Gina into it. She's known as the party guru on campus. She filled me in on this massive party happening deep in the woods last Thursday. And with the weekend approaching, most folks were down for some midweek partying. We packed our flashlights and ventured into the woods, sharing jokes to ease our jittery nerves. Everything went smoothly until we veered off the main trail onto a narrow, 2-foot-wide path. I was getting anxious, but I kept quiet, assuming Gina knew the way. We followed that path for a while, and eventually, we stumbled upon a clearing where the trees were less dense. There were empty bottles and a towel on the ground, a sign we were on the right track, or so Gina thought. She confessed she might have gotten a bit turned around, but assured me we were close to the party. Because she'd been to this clearing before, she started calling out, hoping for a reply from someone who knew where the party was, but there was silence. Eerie silence. So, she dialed up one of her friends who was supposed to be at the party. Her friend answered, and after a brief conversation, Gina claimed to know our location. We shared a nervous laugh, but right then, something sent a shiver down our spines. From behind us, we heard a strange noise. A mix between a distant train whistle and someone blowing on a pitch pipe. We spun around, our flashlights slicing through the darkness, only to reveal a deer. But this wasn't your ordinary deer. It was standing upright on its hind legs, one foreleg casually resting against a tree, and it was watching us with those dark, penetrating eyes. I know it sounds absurd, but the way it watched us was unsettling beyond words. Gina took off like a rocket, and I stood there, mesmerized and terrified by this bizarre sight. It felt like an eternity before I snapped out of it and sprinted after her, my heart pounding like a jackhammer. I couldn't bear the thought of being left alone with that thing. As we fled through the woods, terror gnawing at our heels, another one of those strange whizzing sounds echoed from the left. We aimed our flashlights, and there, to our disbelief, was another deer. Also on its hind legs, but this one moved more like a dog. Bounding towards us, it reached a tree and peeked its head and neck out, eyes locked onto us. I burst into tears, yelling at Gina to call the police, though deep down, I knew it wouldn't help at this point. Panic had taken over, and I was convinced we were about to meet our demise. The woods seemed to rustle and come alive, and we were certain that something sinister was closing in on us. But then, out of nowhere, came a savior, a colossal dog, bigger than any I'd ever seen. Like a Newfoundland, but with sleek, black fur, this canine strolled right up to us. And instead of attacking the deer, it simply stared it down. No growls, no barks, just an intense, silent standoff. The deer started making this weird coughing noise, but the dog responded with a menacing snarl. Still without making a sound, Then, as if bored, it turned away from the deer and approached us, barking excitedly. Minutes later, a familiar face emerged from the underbrush. One of my professors from sophomore year. He was calling out to his dog, Baron, who had apparently wandered off into the woods. He looked puzzled to see us there, crying and terrified, but didn't ask many questions. He offered to drive us back to campus, and we gladly accepted. I haven't slept a wink since last night, and I've scoured the internet trying to make sense of what we experienced. But I'm telling you, I can't find any logical explanation for those upright walking deer and that enigmatic black dog. It's like we stumbled into some surreal Twilight Zone of the forest, and I can't shake the feeling that we were lucky to make it out alive. I grew up in a quaint little suburb nestled about 30 minutes outside the bustling city of Portland, Oregon. Our household was a family of 5, complete with two doting parents and 3 spirited daughters. As the baby of the family, there was always an undeniable age gap between my sisters and me, with 5 and 7 years setting us apart. My siblings didn't often engage in play with me out of their own volition. Instead, I often found myself resorting to solitary adventures. I'd often gripe to my mom about my loneliness, prompting her to gently coerce my dad into playing Barbies with me. It wasn't the kind of father-daughter bonding session he enthusiastically anticipated, but he indulged me nonetheless. However, as time went on, my mom began to notice something peculiar whenever she entered a room where I played alone. She would catch me in the act, engaged in animated conversations with what appeared to be thin air. Concerned, my mom inquired about my curious conversations. My response was always matter of fact. I'm talking to Charlie, naturally puzzled. My mom probed further, asking me about Charlie's identity. My reply sent shivers down her spine. I described Charlie as an old man, tall and somewhat stooped, with unusually large hands and a perpetually warm smile. He was always dressed in sweaters and boasted a remarkable belt buckle that seemed right out of a cowboy's wardrobe. This wasn't your typical imaginary friend, like the half-unicorn, half-monkey variety. Charlie was something different, something altogether more mysterious. My mom decided to confide in my dad about this unsettling description, and his reaction was nothing short of jaw-dropping. You see, my dad was a staunch skeptic, but when he heard the details, he couldn't believe his ears. That's the exact description of my grandpa Charlie, he exclaimed. This revelation left them both perplexed. We didn't have any photographs of Grandpa Charlie around the house, so the connection was bewildering. Grandpa Charlie, it turns out, had been a beloved figure in my dad's life, and their relationship was something my dad cherished. He had been close to my aunt, uncle, and us. His grandkids, sadly, Grandpa Charlie had moved away when my dad was just a young boy, as his family relocated from Missouri to Louisiana. The distance had taken Grandpa Charlie far away from my dad, a fact that had crushed him. The farm Grandpa Charlie left behind, with its multitude of animals and tractors, was a childhood paradise for my dad, a stark contrast to today's kids who seemed allergic to the outdoors. Grandpa Charlie's story took a somber turn. He passed away when my dad was just 8 or 9, succumbing to kidney failure, and his wife followed not long after. My parents had never broached the subject of Grandpa Charlie in my presence, and they were determined to keep it that way. But Charlie, it seemed, had other plans. He began to make his presence known in unmistakable ways. There was a laundry room in our duplex, more like a narrow corridor or a mudroom. My mom always kept the door open when she did the laundry so she could hear me if I needed her. Yet, every time she stepped into that room, the door would mysteriously shut. At first, my mom brushed it off as a quirky coincidence, but it soon grew into an uncanny pattern. She decided to prop the door open with various objects, but each time, they would be subtly moved out of the way, and the door would close again. The door was one of those lightweight, hollow wooden ones, not all heavy, and the house itself had solid floors and door frames, showing no signs of warping. Then, one day, as my mom was in the midst of her laundry routine, the door closed once more. Frustration and curiosity now overwhelming her, she felt compelled to speak aloud, her voice stern. "Charlie, if that's you, please stop shutting the door on me. I'm trying to get things done." After that moment, the laundry room door never closed on its own again. Charlie, it seemed, was attempting to communicate in subtle ways. But one night, Charlie decided to take a more direct approach. It was an ordinary evening, with my mom, sisters, and me huddled together in the living room, engrossed in the glow of the television. Suddenly, chaos erupted. The radio in my sister's bedroom blared to life, as did my parents' radio alarm clock, both at full volume. Panic surged through everyone except for me, who, strangely composed, thought intruders had invaded our home. My mom acted swiftly, instructing us to head to the front yard and, if we heard her scream, run to the neighbor's house to call 911. She grabbed the nearest heavy object and ventured further into the house, a determined look in her eyes. It was a chilling procession as we followed her, our parents' penchant for conserving electricity evident in the darkness of the hallway. She turned on every light in her path as we made our way toward the rooms housing the rogue radios, both situated across from each other at the end of the hall. To our collective relief, there were no intruders to be found, neither lurking in closets nor hidden under beds. The radios were silenced, and the house stood still. My mom couldn't fathom what had just occurred. It was then that she heard me giggling, and she asked what was so funny. My response sent shivers down her spine once more. "It's okay, Mom. It's just Charlie." My juvenile laughter filled the room as I found my own joke amusing. In retrospect, it was a comically brave reaction for a 3-year-old. Today, faced with a similar situation, I might have needed a fresh pair of pants. The oddest part of this incident was the radios themselves. To activate them required turning to knobs. One to switch them from the off position to FM radio and another to adjust the volume. These were old-school radios, even for the early 90s. My mom attempted to dismiss the event as an electrical anomaly, but my sisters weren't buying it. That night, we all sought solace in our parents' room, nestled together in the safety of numbers. Our time in the duplex came to an end after a year, and I felt a profound sadness about leaving. I can still recall a vague sense of melancholy, though my mom tells me it was even more challenging for me back then. I attributed my tears to the house being crimed, which was my toddler way of saying haunted. Charlie didn't accompany us to our new residence, or perhaps he did, but he chose not to reveal himself to me again. I like to think he's still watching over me, a silent guardian in the shadows. Over the years, I've been told that I must have a guardian angel, as I've embarked on many reckless adventures with a remarkable absence of arrests, injuries, or worse. Not all supernatural stories are harrowing. Some, like Charlie's presence in my life, offer a comforting reassurance that there might be more to our world than meets the eye. Last week, my friend and I embarked on a spine-chilling journey southward, headed for the eerie depths of Nashville, Tennessee. Our ominous adventure took an unexpected pit stop in the mysterious town of Abingdon, Virginia. We'd heard whispers of an age-old haunt known as the Martha Washington Inn, its name echoing ominously in our ears. With a quick online search, I stumbled upon the inn's website, which painted a picture of charm, history, and comfort. It was too tempting to resist. I promptly booked a room. As the shadows lengthened, I delved into a deeper investigation of Abingdon's history. Unearthed tales of the Martha Washington Inn sent shivers down my spine. Constructed in the late 1700s by a wealthy military man for his wife and 9 offspring, the inn had a dark past. It had served as a college for women and bore the name of Martha Washington. During the Civil War, it transformed into a hospital, and the female students turned into nurses. It was here that a wounded Union soldier, his existence a guarded secret, was hidden away in a room overlooking the sinister garden. His savior was a young woman who used haunting melodies to soothe his suffering and calm his tormented soul. This union of love, born in the midst of agony, ended with his last breath. It is said that their spirits still linger, with guests often claiming to hear the mournful strains of a violin in room 211, the very room where he met his doom. As an Irishman, I had grown up steeped in supernatural tales, so this history didn't daunt me too much. But I must admit, my nerves were rattled when we were handed the key to room 211 upon checking. My friend and I hesitated for a moment, exchanged a nervous glance, but decided to brave the unknown. We made our way down the dimly lit hallway to our room. Nestled on the garden level, the room was quaint and comfortable, adorned with pleasant decor that concealed the lurking horrors. Upon entering, we were greeted by a peculiar sight. A small entrance hallway led to an alcove with a sink and vanity, and beyond that lay the bathroom. The bedroom itself beckoned ominously, but as my friend ventured inside, she called out to me, her voice trembling. She asked me to come back and inspect the shadow that loomed menacingly across the exterior of the entrance. I complied, but to my disbelief, I found no trace of the shadow. Perplexed, we ventured outside, scanning the corridor for any sign of fellow guests. No one was there, but as we stood there, grappling with our racing imaginations, a woman's cough pierced the silence. We couldn't pinpoint its source, and we dismissed it as originating from another distant room. We chided ourselves for our vivid imaginations and proceeded to settle into our room. After preparing for bed, we ventured out into the town for exploration and ended up at the historic tavern for an early supper. This ancient building, dating back to 1784, had weathered centuries of turmoil. We enjoyed a decent dinner, accompanied by a bottle of wine, and the staff regaled us with stories of the tavern's dark past, which included serving as a field hospital during the Civil War. Returning to the inn, we sipped a small glass of port before retiring early, for we had a long journey ahead. As the clock struck 10 o'clock, I began to feel an intense, bone-chilling cold that seemed to penetrate to my very soul. Groggy with sleep, instead of rising to adjust the heat, I clung to the duvet and embraced a pillow, desperately seeking warmth. And then it began. A nightmare, vivid and terrifying, gripped my senses. But this was just the beginning of our nightmarish ordeal. At 2:45 a.m., I awoke to find my friend also wide awake in the adjacent bed. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She was shivering in the cold night air, unable to find solace in slumber. As I began to recount my nightmare, a strange sight caught our attention. In the semi-darkness, we realized that we had left a light on in the bathroom, but something eerie lay draped over her bed. A spectral veil stretching across the distance between our beds. It was as though the room itself had become possessed. As we strained our eyes, we discerned that this spectral presence was none other than toilet paper. But how? The bathroom was a considerable distance from the bedroom, accessed through a hall and an anteroom housing the sink and vanity. To pull the paper across all three spaces without tearing or twisting, it would have been a supernatural feat, a ghastly riddle that defied explanation. As if this wasn't disconcerting enough, the toilet paper lay neatly tucked in behind me, covering my upper torso beneath the bed covers. It remained unbroken, only tearing when I sat up, unleashing a shroud of confusion in its wake. A palpable thickness weighed down the room, a malevolent force that stifled us both. Our heads throbbed, and my friend struggled to draw breath. After a tense period of contemplation, we decided to brave the darkness once more, seeking refuge in restless sleep. Fitful hours passed, and with the rising sun outside our garden window, we could endure it no longer. The heavy weight upon our heads persisted as we dressed swiftly. Exchanging nervous glances, we descended the creaking stairs to breakfast, where we reluctantly shared our spine-chilling encounter with the inn staff. To our surprise, they didn't bat an eye. Instead, they regaled us with unsettling tales from the previous week. A terrified businessman who had vowed never to return. a nurse who awoke to her ankles being tugged, and a Japanese businessman who had hastily changed rooms after a similar eerie encounter. One guest even spoke of a spectral child, a little girl who had been sighted in the corridor and who had tragically drowned in a nearby creek at the tender age of 6. We couldn't help but wonder if her mischievous spirit had paid us a visit that eerie night. As our toilet paper seance suggested, the persistent headaches that plagued us seemed to dissipate as soon as we vacated the room. As we left the Martha Washington Inn, our nerves still jangling with the unsettling events of the night, I couldn't help but notice that my toiletries had been tampered with. My creams and lotions had been mysteriously depleted by half, as if a mischievous spirit, perhaps the spectral child, had taken a liking to our perfumes and potions that fateful evening. In the cold light of day, I couldn't deny the reality of our haunting experience at the Martha Washington Inn. What had started as a mere stopover in Abingdon had turned into a nightmarish encounter with the supernatural. The mysteries of room 211 would forever haunt our memories, and the chilling embrace of that toilet paper fandom would remain etched in our minds. In the chilling year of 1941, the Newfoundland embarked upon an ominous journey into the icy depths of the unknown. With a crew of 240 for brave souls, they set sail on March 30th, with the bitter cold clinging to their hopes and fears. Their mission, to hunt seals. Little did they know, terror was lurking just beyond the frozen horizon. As the Newfoundland ventured farther into the unforgiving Arctic waters, a creeping unease gripped the hearts of the crew. A sense of impending doom loomed over them like a shadow, casting doubt upon their fateful expedition. The clock ticked, and on that fateful day, 66 brave men ventured onto the ice, determined to claim their quarry. But fate had other plans. The tempestuous storm descended upon them with the wrath of a vengeful deity. Locking them in its icy embrace for 2 agonizing days, the tempest's fury raged unabated, and the men on the ice found themselves stranded, a sea of white nothingness surrounding them. Desperation gnawed at their souls as they yearned to return to the safety of the Newfoundland, their sanctuary in the unforgiving Arctic. But the storm's relentless grip refused to release them from its clutches. When the tempest finally receded, it revealed a grim reality. The Newfoundland, their beacon of hope, had drifted away, leaving them stranded on the merciless ice. As the Newfoundland sailed out of sight, other ships rallied to aid their distressed comrades. Desperate searches ensued, but the Arctic's icy embrace had claimed its toll. 72 souls were discovered lifeless, their dreams frozen in the bitter cold, while 5 were forever lost, presumed swallowed by the unforgiving sea. The Newfoundland returned home, a vessel heavy with sorrow, haunted by the memories of that ill-fated voyage. The next year, it was deemed unlucky, cursed even, to return to the treacherous ice, in a desperate bid to break the curse. The ship underwent a transformative rebirth, emerging as the San Blanford, its grim history buried beneath layers of hope. 2 years passed, and the San Blanford once again dared to face the Arctic's icy maw. It was March 30th, the anniversary of that dreadful storm. A sense of foreboding hung in the air as the ship ventured further into the frozen abyss. Dusk descended, casting a shroud of darkness over the ship and its intrepid crew. A haunting fog rolled in, obscuring their vision and muffling the world into an eerie silence. Amidst the eerie stillness, a distant sound pierced through the forlorn cry of another ship, the Terra Nova blowing its mournful whistle. It was a signal that the Terra Nova still had men out on the ice, just as they had that ill-fated day on the Newfoundland. The crew of the San Blanford rallied, responding with their own mournful calls into the abyss. As they did, voices from the icy void called back, a cacophony of spectral echoes. They believed these voices belonged to the sailors of the Terra Nova, adrift on the frozen expanse. The 2 ships maintained their haunting signals until 10 p.m., when suddenly, the voices ceased, silence descended, and hope rose like a phantom. But when the morning sun cast its pallid light upon the ice, it revealed a perplexing truth. A sailor from the San Blanford ventured onto the Terra Nova to conduct business, and the captain's inquiry sent shivers down his spine. "What time did your crew return last night?" the Terra Nova's captain inquired. Puzzled, the sailor replied, "We didn't have anyone out on the ice, sir." The Terra Nova's captain exchanged grim glances with his crew, insisting that they had heard the voices, they had seen the signals. There had been 5 men who climbed aboard the San Blanford shortly before 10 p.m., and they were certain of it. When the sailor returned to the San Blanford and reported this eerie incident, the captain took him aside, his voice a whisper of dread. He confessed that the sailor's report was true. A few members of the night crew had indeed seen 5 spectral figures boarding their ship that very night. These apparitions were clad in tattered clothing, as if it had been mercilessly torn by the relentless sea. To make matters even more unsettling, the crew could see right through their ethereal bodies, their forms shining like the palest moonlight. It was a vision that sent shivers down the bravest of spines. One of the sailors on duty that harrowing evening had been aboard the Newfoundland when it lost those 66 valiant men 2 years prior. That very night, the faces of those lost souls had returned to haunt the San Blanford, as if summoned by some dreadful force. The captain's heart sank as he realized the unthinkable spirits long lost to the Arctic's icy grip had returned, perhaps seeking the peace they had been denied in death. The crew of the San Blanford would forever carry the weight of that haunting encounter, a grim reminder that in the unforgiving Arctic, the line between the living and the dead was as thin as the ice itself, and as they sailed forth, they couldn't help but wonder if the curse of that ill-fated voyage had truly been broken, or if the spirits of the lost still lingered, condemned to wander the frozen wasteland for all eternity. Gather round, my friends, for a tale that will send shivers down your spine. It was a cold, moonless night in the heart of March when a brave group of friends and I decided to venture deep into the ominous Bridgewater Triangle. Our expedition led us through a nightmarish odyssey, teeming with malevolent entities and shadowy mysteries. Now, before we plunge into the heart of darkness, let me introduce myself. I'm what some might call a sensitive or psychic. My senses are tuned to the supernatural, allowing me to feel, hear, and even see ghosts and otherworldly beings. This tale hinges on my extraordinary abilities as we plunge headlong into the chilling enigmas of the Bridgewater Triangle. But first, let's paint a grim picture of the Bridgewater Triangle, an area in Massachusetts notorious for inexplicable occurrences. This is not your ordinary run-of-the-mill haunted region. It's a hotbed of high strangeness. From UFO sightings to cryptid encounters featuring the infamous Bigfoot and monstrous Thunderbirds, this place reeks of the paranormal. Throw in some unsettling demon worship and a staggering number of hauntings, and you've got yourself a paranormal pressure cooker. This eerie triangle is formed by the towns of Rehoboth, Abington, and Bridgewater, with its epicenter oozing dread. One of the darkest pockets within this unholy trinity is the notorious Hockomock Swamp. Its reputation for paranormal phenomena stretches back to the time of the Pilgrims. But it's not just the ghosts that haunt this place. It played a pivotal role in King Philip's War, serving as a sinister base for Metacomet and King Philip to launch their savage attacks on nearby settlements. The Wampanoag tribe of the Algonquin Nation aptly named it Hockomock, which translates to place where spirits dwell. Early settlers had a less friendly name for it, Devil's Swamp. Our terrifying journey commenced at the dreaded Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast in Fall River. While technically just outside the triangle, this place was positively brimming with paranormal energy. I'd visited it before and had a taste of what awaited us, but my companions were mere newcomers to this macabre stage. Upon entering this sinister house, we were ushered into a small parlor where we awaited our tour. As I settled into the chair nearest to the doorway, my psychic senses tingled. "Mr. Borden, The former owner of this grisly abode was no fan of uninvited guests. I felt his spectral presence as he strolled over from his couch to the doorway, casting a malevolent gaze upon our group. When the tour guide began her macabre monologue, he returned to his couch, seemingly bored with our presence. The parlor itself exuded an oppressive, chilling aura, but the real horrors were yet to come. Our descent into the abyss continued as we moved to the dining room. Here, I sensed nothing unusual, but the tour guide had a sinister surprise in store. She unveiled crime scene photos that painted a gruesome tableau of the past. Our next stop was the living room, the very place where Mr. Borden had met his grisly end. As we crossed the threshold, I felt Mr. Borden rise from his couch once more. Engrossed in conversation with my friends, I paid little heed to his spectral movements. But as the room filled with fellow thrill-seekers, I decided to explore a small bookshelf beside the fireplace. There, I felt the spectral presence of Mr. Borden standing behind a chair, with Mrs. Borden seated in it. Unbeknownst to me, the chair was strategically angled toward a replica of the couch where Mr. Borden had met his gruesome fate. My grave error became evident when I realized I had inadvertently left the chair empty as the group gathered. This displeased Mr. Borden greatly, and I could feel his withering, disapproving stare from behind the chair I occupied. I longed to bolt away from that dreadful place, but fate had other plans. A friend decided to snap a photograph of me in an accursed chair, forcing me to remain seated until she was finished. Only when I got the chance did I flee, racing across the room. Our chilling journey was far from over. Strange occurrences began to unfold throughout the house, sending our nerves into overdrive. One friend claimed to hear eerie noises emanating from one of the attic rooms. Driven by curiosity, they ventured forth to investigate, finding nothing amiss. But as they returned to update me and my boyfriend, they stumbled upon a large marble mysteriously placed right where one of them had stood near. Moments earlier, another friend reported hearing phantom footsteps trailing us as we ascended the stairs. The unnerving events of the Lizzie Borden house were but a prelude to the horrors that awaited us. In the Bridgewater Triangle, our path took us to the forbidding Dighton Rock State Park in Berkeley, Massachusetts. Dighton Rock, a cryptic boulder unearthed during the construction of a dam, was etched with indecipherable petroglyphs. The origin of these inscriptions remained an enigmatic riddle, with theories ranging from Native Americans to ancient Phoenicians, Norse explorers, Portuguese settlers, and even mysterious Chinese seafarers. The park, officially closed for the season, forced us to park our car in a desolate dirt area off the main road. We then embarked on a harrowing journey, walking down a seemingly endless, eerily quiet road leading to the park. The usual sounds of chirping birds and babbling streams were conspicuously absent, replaced by an eerie, deafening silence. Even the conversations of the people we passed seemed muffled, as though an invisible hand stifled all noise. As we walked, an unshakable sense of being watched and hunted consumed us. We huddled closely together, engaging in ceaseless conversation to ward off the encroaching dread. None of us dared to speak openly about our growing unease, fearing that naming our fear might make it manifest. Amidst this palpable tension, I felt an ever-present, gnawing discomfort in the pit of my stomach. The woods that surrounded us seemed unusually thick and filled with thorns, a thicket of malevolence. Faint rustlings and eerie movements echoed through the oppressive darkness. My peripheral vision played tricks on me, teasing me with glimpses of shadowy figures lurking in the foreboding shadows. Then, at a spine-chilling moment, I turned my head and beheld a sight that will forever haunt my nightmares. There, in the woods, just a stone's throw from our path, stood a fully transparent Native American warrior. He was tall, his spine slightly hunched, his chest bare, adorned with feathers in his hair. His quiver of arrows clung to his back, and his presence reeked of centuries-old malevolence. Our eyes locked, and my heart pounded like a drum. He watched us from a distance, a spectral guardian of the woods. However, as we entered the clearing leading to the park, the spectral warrior did not dare breach its boundaries. The relief I felt upon entering the park was fleeting, for his relentless gaze followed us until we reached our car. What chilled me to the bone was that I alone had seen him, his ominous eyes burning into my very soul. Our harrowing odyssey was far from complete. Regrettably, the Dighton Rock Museum remained closed that fateful day, leaving me yearning for answers. I vowed to return when it was open, determined to seek out that enigmatic spirit once more. As we drove away from the darkness of the Bridgewater Triangle, the palpable sense of malevolence and otherworldly dread clung to us like a sinister shroud. This nightmarish journey had irrevocably etched its horrors into our souls. A chilling reminder that in the hidden corners of Massachusetts, the veil between the living and the dead is fragile, and the darkness awaits those who dare to uncover its secrets. Alright, gather round, folks, 'cause I've got a spooky tale for you that'll send shivers down your spine. This spine-tingling story dates back to Halloween night in 2008, and it's not just my own encounter, but involves my brother, sister, and some close friends. Buckle up, 'cause this one's a long and eerie ride. Now, picture this. We were living in Canberra during our childhood. A place known far and wide as the most haunted spot in all of Australia, thanks to its rich and chilling history. As a kid, I never paid much mind to all the paranormal stuff, but my sister and her 3 pals were different. They were Wiccans, and every now and then, they'd try to connect with spirits over at the nearest cemetery during daylight hours. Usually, it was just a chill breeze or the sound of footsteps that greeted them. But Halloween 2008, that's when things took a turn for the terrifying. So, on that fateful night, the gang decided to head down to the cemetery at the stroke of midnight. My brother and his buddy tagged along, and they were all roughly between the ages of 13 to 19. Now, as for me, I made the foolish choice to stay home, and let me tell you, I've regretted it ever since. You see, this cemetery was no ordinary resting place. It was nestled beside one of Australia's oldest churches, a spooky relic from 1840 called St. John's Baptist Church. They marched down there, not really expecting much, just some spooky Halloween fun. But once they reached the cemetery, it was all business. They formed a circle, clasped hands, and placed a candle in the center. Then, my sister read something aloud from a book. Things were about to get real eerie, real quick. For about 10 minutes, they scanned their surroundings in the dark, until one of my sister's friends spotted something, a grayish, glowing figure that seemed to flicker in and out of focus. Lurking about 20 meters away near the churchyard, they huddled together, whispering and watching as the figure became clearer. It turned out to be a ghostly young girl dressed in 19th century attire, twirling and dancing with her arms. They were mesmerized. Not frightened at all. In fact, they were awestruck. Now, my brother and his buddy were intrigued too, so they crept closer. But here's where things took a creepy twist. Near the ghost girl, there was an old fig tree, and they noticed something bizarre. The dirt around the tree started levitating, and they heard this spine-chilling growling, like a dying animal, coming from that direction. Suddenly, something began taking shape, slowly forming into a humanoid figure on all fours, flickering in and out of focus. Oddly, the girl ghost vanished and started digging frantically under the tree, like she was searching for something buried deep. Up until this point, they were thrilled that the seance had worked, but that thrill was short-lived. As my brother and his friend approached, the strange ghost abruptly stopped, and an eerie silence descended. Then, it locked eyes with them, viewing them as a threat. Without warning, it started crawling and floating toward them aggressively, emitting a blood-curdling screech. It would disappear and reappear, inching closer with each reappearance. I can only imagine the terror they felt, as their perception of reality twisted and warped before their very eyes. My advice to them was that they should have stuck around to see what it wanted, but they were having none of it. They were convinced this entity meant harm, Panic surged through them, and there was no way they'd stay any longer. They fled the scene. My brother the last to look back, and he swore that the creepy thing was still hot on their heels. Meanwhile, the girl ghost reappeared in the same spot. They didn't return to that cemetery for months. Those images were seared into their minds. Personally, I would have gone back that very night, but hey, different strokes, right? When they finally called my mom to pick them up, they spilled everything they'd witnessed. At first, I was skeptical, but one look at my brother's ghostly white face convinced me otherwise. They were all terrified yet strangely exhilarated. To this day, I wonder if that girl ghost was leading them toward the malevolent entity. And here's where the tale takes a darker twist. Folks, 1 year later, they decided to return to the cemetery, and this time, I went with them. But I'll tell you, it wasn't anywhere near as eventful. After our own seance, I ventured off on my own for a few minutes. That's when I felt it a creeping unease, like something was watching me, something threatening. Without reason, I suddenly saw a ghostly white figure hover over me for about 3 seconds. I shivered but moved away. I stayed about 10 meters away from the group, scanning the graveyard for anything unusual. For a while, it was all quiet, and I saw nothing. But about 5 minutes later, I swear I saw something in the corner of my eye. It wobbled and flickered, like a pale green flame. And it was right around where the young girl ghost had appeared the year before. It was captivating, almost hypnotic. I stared at it for about half a minute before returning to the group, excited to finally have my own paranormal encounter. However, as we approached, it seemed different, less ghostly. And guess what, folks? All that was there was a decrepit, tall, gray tombstone. We felt silly, standing there for about 15 minutes with nothing happening. The only sound was eerie noises coming from the church, like someone moving heavy objects. On the way home, everyone was saying stuff like, well, that was a dud. But I couldn't shake my frustration and disappointment. I knew what I'd seen couldn't have been just a tombstone. They don't fade in and out, glow, move, or change shape. I believe it was another ghostly encounter, and to this day, I sometimes drive down to that cemetery, snapping pictures in the hopes of catching something intriguing. Out of the 58 pictures I've taken, only one contains a ghostly figure. I've had more eerie experiences since then, but that's a tale for another night, my friends. So, what do you think? Ready to visit a haunted cemetery yourself? Or are you content to hear about the chills and thrills from the safety of your own home? You know, where I come from, everyone's heard of Highway Sheila. Some folks even claim to have known her in person. She was a vibrant, cheerful lady, full of life and love. The kind who wouldn't harm a fly, let alone a person, given the size of our town. It's not hard to believe that many folks might have crossed paths with her. But what happened to her? It's the stuff of nightmares. Her death, it was gruesome and tragic, and nobody could make sense of it. No one knew who would want to harm someone as sweet as Sheila. Her passing sent shockwaves through our community. Now, they say she earned her nickname because of the eerie occurrences that followed her death. The story goes that one fateful night, Sheila was on her way home, driving down that lonely highway, when her car got a flat tire. Imagine this, no cell phone back then to call for help. So, there she was, stuck in the dead of night, trying to flag down passing cars. She finally caught the attention of one driver who pulled over to help. But here's where things take a dark turn. When Sheila approached the car, she noticed the driver had about for friends with him. She explained her situation, politely asked for their assistance. However, there was something off about them. They seemed intoxicated, and as they checked her tire, they started acting strangely, making inappropriate remarks, even touching her inappropriately. Fear crept over her, and she bravely told them she no longer needed their help, asking them directly to leave. Well, that didn't sit well with them. Their anger flared, and they turned aggressive, even violent. One of them shoved her into her car, and they began assaulting her. She screamed for help, but her cries fell on deaf ears. They silenced her by covering her mouth. They took turns tormenting her, cutting her, leaving marks on her body, torturing her until she had no strength left to cry or scream. Poor Sheila just lay there, helpless and suffering. Those sickos took her life, and to make matters worse, they found amusement in their heinous act. Little did they know, they had made a grave mistake. Sheila returned from the grave. Thirsting for vengeance against her murderers, she hunted them down, one by one, in the most brutal ways imaginable. Many folks have claimed to encounter her, saying she haunts the Ento Highway, meddling with cars as they pass. It's even said that she hitchhikes, trying to make her way back home. Now, I can't say for sure what she looks like, and I sure as heck don't want to find out. And neither should you or anyone else for that matter. There's a chilling photograph out there, taken by a guy who wanted to show his family this eerie house near the highway. I doubt he ever returned to that place after taking that picture. Can't blame him. We don't know how much of this story is true. But if you ever find yourself on the Ento Highway in South Africa, keep an eye out for Highway Sheila. You might just want to steer clear and pray you never run into her. A late evening in August 2019, I used to scoff at ghost stories and laugh off horror movies, believing myself to be impervious to fear. My pals deemed me lucky because I managed to evade the spine-chilling terror of those gruesome scenes. I was convinced that ghosts and all things paranormal were nothing more than figments of imagination until that fateful night. You see, my family hails from an Anglo-Indian background, and it's our age-old tradition to gather at our ancestral bungalow for special occasions. This time, it was my cousin Elvis's wedding, and the entire place was pulsating with the rhythms of celebration. As someone who cannot see, the loud music began to disorient me. I sought refuge in the serenity of the bungalow's backyard, quiet respite from the clamor. Elvis, my cousin and guiding light, guided me to a tranquil spot in the lawn where we could catch up. I felt a sense of comfort as we chatted away, not a care in the world. But then, as if on cue, one of my aunts called out for Elvis, with reassurances of his return. He left me standing there, the distant thumping of the music still resonating in my ears. As I stood alone, the evening chill began to creep into my skin. The swing in the backyard started swaying gently, its creaking hauntingly audible. I strained my senses, wondering if someone else was present with me in the quietude. Is someone there? I called out, but received no response. I brushed it off, assuming the wind had set the swing in motion. However, an uneasy feeling enveloped me like a shroud. It was as if unseen eyes were fixed upon me, watching my every move. The temperature plummeted, and the presence, shadowy and enigmatic, seemed to loom beside me. A voice, deep and unsettling, whispered into my ears. I was gripped by an unprecedented fear, for I had never heard such an eerie voice in my life. My trembling voice demanded answers. Who are you? But there was no reply, only a chilling silence. Panic surged through me as I desperately tried to find my way back to the lively party, the fear gnawing at my insides. Just then, Elvis rushed back to find me in a state of sheer terror. He asked if I was all right, and in a shaky voice, I inquired if someone else had been there with me. To my bewilderment, Elvis assured me that we were the only ones present in the backyard. I implored him to take me away from that place, unable to utter another word. Since that eerie encounter, I've never shared this spine-tingling experience with anyone in my family. I'm convinced they wouldn't believe me, and to this day, the memory sends shivers down my spine. Whether it was a paranormal entity or my cousin's elaborate prank, I may never know. But one thing is certain, it was the stuff of nightmares. A chilling tale of terror and mystery, starring my friend Tim and me. What I'm about to recount will send shivers down your spine, and you may never look at the supernatural the same way again. Unbeknownst to me at the time, a malevolent ghost had set its sights on both Tim and me. It was as if a relentless specter had woven its way into the very fabric of our lives, altering our destinies in ways we could never have imagined. It all began with a series of nightmarish dreams that plagued Tim. In these haunting visions, the ghost taunted him with memories that felt so achingly real, yet he had no recollection of them ever happening. These dreams gnawed at his sanity, making him doubt the very core of his being. Little did we know that these dreams were just the opening act in a horror story that defied explanation. One fateful night, Tim found himself ensnared in another one of these eerie dreams. In the dream, he stood alone in the heart of a dense, fog-shrouded bog. The mist hung so thick that it was nearly indistinguishable from a relentless drizzle. And with each breath, he could see his exhalations dissipate into the frigid air. But something was profoundly wrong. Instead of his trusty insulated hiking boots, his feet were clad in unfamiliar tall leather ones. Confusion washed over him as he examined these strange boots. They were not his own, yet they felt oddly recognizable, like a distant memory tugging at the corners of his mind, trying to shake off the inexplicable unease. Tim attempted to warm his numbing hands by blowing on them. His eyes darted around, taking in his eerie surroundings. As he gazed at the unfamiliar boots, it dawned on him that these were the very boots he recognized from his dream, the same ones he was wearing now. A chill ran down his spine as he stomped his feet, attempting to restore circulation. The pain that shot through his legs suggested he had been hiking for an eternity. In the midst of his bewilderment, he noticed something else peculiar. There was no zipper on these boots, only large, clumsy buttons. Resolving to push forward, Tim tried to zip his fly to relieve himself, but encountered a baffling twist. Instead of the familiar zipper, he found himself fumbling with the unwieldy buttons. His fingers, stiff and frostbitten from the cold, made the task an arduous one. Panic began to seep in as he realized he was stranded in this nightmarish woods with boots that were not his own, wearing pants he couldn't fully unzip. The surrounding forest, swallowed by the impending night and obscured by the thick fog, offered no solace. With a deep breath and a shaky resolve, Tim picked a direction and forged ahead, clinging to the hope that he would soon emerge from this sinister wood. Yet, as he trudged onward, each step became an act of defiance against the oppressive darkness that sought to consume him. The woods fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of Tim's labored breathing and the crisp crunch of leaves and twigs beneath his unfamiliar boots. Then, in the distance, he thought he heard a voice, a faint, haunting call that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. Startled, he froze in his tracks, his heart racing, and called out into the void, "Who's there?" A deafening silence was his only reply. Undeterred but increasingly unnerved, he took another step, straining to hear the elusive voice once more. And there it was. Faint but undeniable, a voice calling out, a voice that seemed both distant and intimate. Tim's anxiety mounted as he shouted into the darkness, desperate for a response, yet receiving none. With each step he took, the voice seemed to grow closer, only to fade away when he ceased to move. The eerie echoes filled the air as Tim cautiously surveyed his surroundings, trying to make sense of this macabre game. Panic gnawed at him as he realized he was utterly alone in this impenetrable darkness, with only his own breathing and the rustling of leaves beneath him for company. Dread gripped him as he continued on, the misty veil of night growing thicker with every passing moment. And then, as he strained his eyes to peer into the murk, he noticed it, a faint, flickering light, like a distant star fighting to pierce the suffocating darkness. Simultaneously, the voice returned, emanating from the same direction as the light. Determined and desperate for an escape from this nightmare, Tim set his course toward that elusive flicker. He quickened his pace, keeping the light within his sights. A lifeline in this disorienting abyss, every step was a battle against exhaustion and fear. But he could not afford to lose sight of that flickering beacon. The fate of his very soul seemed to hinge upon it. Through thick underbrush and fallen branches, He pressed on, stumbling and falling numerous times on the cold, damp ground. His palms were scratched and bleeding from breaking his falls. But the biting cold numbed the pain. The light ahead grew slightly larger, yet it danced with an airy irregularity, flickering like a capricious flame in the relentless void. As Tim fought to draw each breath in the frigid air, his journey took on the surreal quality of a nightmare within a nightmare. He felt as though he had traversed miles and hours, but the light remained agonizingly distant, as though mocking his futile pursuit. Exhaustion gnawed him, and he knew he could not press on without a moment's respite. Summoning the last reserves of his strength, Tim backed up against the colossal tree. Careful not to let the flickering light slip from his gaze, he squatted down, attempting to alleviate the strain on his aching legs with each labored breath. He tried to slow the wild pounding of his heart, but something was amiss. The darkness seemed to constrict around him, as if invisible hands were slowly throttling his windpipe. Panic surged as he realized he was teetering on the precipice of unconsciousness, his legs giving way beneath him. Only the massive tree trunk kept him upright as his vision dimmed, the mist playing tricks on his senses, distorting the trees like wraiths in the fog. His head throbbed in rhythm with his racing heart, his eyelids swelling to the point of obscuring his vision, struggling for each labored breath. Tim could feel the oppressive weight of the atmosphere, as though the very air conspired to smother him. The flickering light, his only anchor in this unfathomable nightmare, seemed to recede, drawing further away even as he fought to maintain his connection to it. Utterly drained, he knew he had to stop and rest, despite the relentless dread that gnawed at him. Leaning heavily against the tree, he sank into a squatting position, his eyes never wavering from the elusive light. Desperation clawed at him as he drew deep breaths, but his heart continued its erratic dance. Yet, the darkness closed in further, as if determined to extinguish his very life force. Tim's vision blurred, and his limbs turned to lead. It was as if a malevolent presence sought to drag him into the abyss, and he began to yield to the inexorable pull. Just as he teetered on the precipice of unconsciousness, he raised his eyes one final time toward the flickering light. Suddenly, it loomed before him, a searing blaze that burned his retinas. The heat was so intense that it felt as though his very flesh was melting from his bones. A piece of the fiery mass broke free, landing on something nearby, a strap or belt, it seemed. The inferno ignited with a malevolent hunger, flames consuming the strap and inching dangerously close to Tim's neck. Panic surged as he fumbled to extinguish the fire, but the strap seemed to melt with his flesh. Desperation gripped him, and he cried out in the suffocating darkness, "Someone, please help me." In the blink of an eye, the choking pressure on his neck vanished, replaced by blessed, life-giving air. Simultaneously, the inferno dissipated into nothingness. Tim gasped for breath, trembling with a mix of relief and terror. His eyes, now adjusting to the sudden change, revealed a figure before him, a woman with her head cocked to one side, her gaze fixed upon him. As his vision cleared, Tim realized this was no ordinary woman. Her presence exuded an otherworldly aura, and her voice echoed in his mind. "You must do what I say." Then, as abruptly as she had appeared, she was gone. With a jolt, Tim awoke, drenched in sweat and trembling. He stumbled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face to rid himself of the lingering terror. As he leaned forward to dry his face, he couldn't help but notice a mark on his neck, a tiny, sinister-looking rope burn. But the horrors didn't end there. My own nightmarish encounter mirrored Tim's. I, too, found myself stranded on a long, desolate gravel road, enveloped by an impenetrable darkness that oozed dread. The road stretched endlessly before me, a narrow strip of gravel winding into the unknown. The night air was heavy with dampness, and a gray mist clung to the ditches, lending an eerie, spectral quality to the surroundings. Towering trees, their branches grotesquely elongated, flanked the road, their skeletal forms reaching out to one another overhead. The branches twisted and interlocked, forming a nightmarish canopy that blotted out the sky. Despite the oppressive mist, I could discern the blackness of those monstrous trees. their leaves dark and unsettling, their branches stretched overhead, striving to touch each other but becoming hopelessly tangled, weaving a web of shadows that engulfed me. In the midst of this unsettling spectacle, a single pinpoint of light glowed in the distance. My heart raced as I noticed a shadowy figure advancing toward me along the desolate road. Panic clutched at my chest, and I struggled to move, my legs and feet refusing to obey my frantic commands. It was as though I were ensnared in quicksand, unable to flee. The figure's movements were jerky and unnatural, each step accompanied by an unsettling, mechanical twitch. Time seemed to stretch and warp, making its approach a never-ending ordeal. Inch by agonizing inch, it drew closer, until it stood mere yards away, a shadowy specter shrouded in the ethereal fog. As I watched, my breath held in abject terror. The figure abruptly stopped. The mist had thinned just enough for me to see its features, but they were obscured by an uncanny, disconcerting haze. I could feel the clammy weight of the night pressing against my skin, tiny beads of moisture forming on my forearm. My gaze was drawn to these droplets as they coalesced into a single, sinuous bead of liquid. It trickled down my arm in agonizingly slow motion, a spectral tear that defied the laws of nature. I watched it with a growing sense of dread, as if some sinister force were guiding its path. And then, with a sudden, jarring shift in my perception, I was transported back to a memory of tears falling into a bowl of soup, a memory of anguish and impending loss. The vision was vivid and haunting, a painful reminder of a sorrow I had long buried. As my thoughts raced, I was jolted back to the present, where the shadowy figure now stood mere inches from me. Its features slowly came into focus, and I saw the face of a woman, her eyes fixed upon me with an unsettling, penetrating stare. Though her lips remained motionless, her voice echoed within the recesses of my mind. "It's time for you to change." Abruptly, I awoke, drenched in cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The memory of that encounter lingered like a festering wound, leaving me with an overwhelming sense of dread. Little did Tim and I know that these nightmarish experiences were only the beginning of a harrowing journey into the unknown. The events that followed plunged us into a terrifying realm where the boundaries between the living and the dead blurred, and the very fabric of reality began to unravel. The ghosts that haunted us did so for a reason, a sinister purpose that would gradually come to light, revealing a hidden agenda that would plunge us deeper into a nightmare beyond our darkest imaginings. In the face of such malevolence, we were left with no choice but to confront the chilling reality that some horrors are not confined to the realm of dreams. They walk among us, seeking to claim our souls in the most horrifying of ways. On a chilling Christmas Eve, our tale unfolds with a soft, haunting echo of unseen footsteps trailing a middle-aged bachelor as he hurried through the thick snowflakes, making his way towards the sanctuary of his home. The eerie cadence of these phantom footsteps mimicked his every move, quickening when he quickened and slowing when he slowed. An unsettling shiver crawled through his flesh as he tried to dismiss his growing unease, cursing his choice to attend the midnight Christmas Mass alone. A sudden desire to hear the old Christmas songs sung by a church choir had drawn him across town. Now, regret gnawed at him like a persistent ghost, haunting his steps as he passed one dark, foreboding house after another, their windows casting eerie shadows on the snowy night. His heart raced, and he quickened his pace, almost running towards his destination. As he reached the bottom of his front steps and darted up, he realized with a start that the ominous footsteps had ceased abruptly. He glanced back, only to find a single set of footprints in the snow-covered street when there should have been two. Puzzlement furrowed his brow, and then a gust of frigid wind struck him, driving snowflakes against his collar. He slammed the front door behind him, his trembling hands struggling to unlock it. Rationality battled superstition within him as he tried to dismiss the idea of the footsteps continuing through his door. Inside, he was met with the warm, inviting glow of a fire coming from his study. A sense of relief washed over him as he assumed his housekeeper must have stayed up to light the fire in anticipation of his return. However, he couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. As he removed his coat, he was surprised to find it still warm and dry. Despite his lengthy walk through the snowstorm, it was as if he had been enveloped in a bubble of calm air, protecting him from the elements. This strange sensation left him momentarily bewildered. His disquiet was interrupted by a shallow greeting from his old friend, Andy, who emerged from the study, his face illuminated by a mischievous grin. The unexpected reunion warmed their hearts, and they fell into conversation, the words tumbling out faster than they could speak. Andy had left town years ago for a government job in D.C., and their meeting after such a long absence was filled with excitement and nostalgia. They talked for nearly an hour, catching up on lost time. It was only when hunger pangs struck that the bachelor realized the passage of time. He offered Andy a meal, but his friend was reluctant to leave the cozy warmth of the fire. He decided to fetch some food himself, leaving Andy by the fire. Down in the kitchen, he couldn't help but wonder about Andy's pallor and persistent shivering. Something about his friend's demeanor was off-putting, but he pushed these thoughts aside, blaming them on the eerie events of the evening. When he returned with warmed-up leftovers and a couple of glasses of beer, Andy apologized for his mismatched dinnerware, though he chuckled it off. They ate heartily, and the bachelor showed his friend to a guest room before retiring to his own bed, the enigmatic footsteps now forgotten. Christmas morning brought him bounding downstairs, eager to start the day with his dear friend. But the guest room was empty, the bed appeared untouched, and there was a plate of food on the end table, left completely untouched. Anxiety gripped him as he searched the house in vain. His housekeeper had seen no one, not the previous night nor that morning. Perplexed and disturbed, he sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, the mystery of Andy's disappearance weighing heavily on his mind, overshadowing the holiday cheer. The unanswered questions plagued him throughout Christmas Day, leaving him unable to savor his holiday dinner. His housekeeper couldn't comprehend his gloom, and he couldn't bring himself to explain the inexplicable. On the morning after Christmas, he awoke from a restless sleep to the sound of the front door. Groggily, he splashed water on his weary eyes, and then a knock at his bedroom door jarred him awake. It was his housekeeper, bearing a telegram. With trembling hands, he opened it, not knowing who could be sending him an urgent message. As he read the terse words, his entire being shook. The message conveyed the tragic news that his old friend, Andy, had passed away on Christmas Eve in his Washington, D.C. home. He sat down the bed, the telegram slipping from his grasp. A realization dawned upon him. It was Andy who had followed him home on that eerie Christmas Eve. The inexplicable footsteps, the ghostly presence, it all made sense now. He had spent Christmas Eve in the company of a ghost, and the implications of that encounter sent chills down his spine that would linger long after the holiday season had ended. When I was growing up, we were pretty oblivious to the eerie dangers associated with Ouija boards. In fact, this supernatural gadget often found its way under our Christmas tree, and we casually toy around with it. I never gave it much thought. I simply assumed someone in the room was pushing the planket. But my perception of this mystical board changed dramatically when I was 17. A pivotal moment that still sends shivers down my spine. It was the 80s, and my then girlfriend, who would later become my first ex-wife, and I were at a friend's house for a party. We were sitting around, sharing stories and hitting a pipe, completely immersed in the hazy atmosphere. That's when the topic of the Ouija board crept into our conversation. My friend's older brother was adamant that it wasn't just a load of nonsense. He claimed it worked if you knew how to use it correctly and gave it enough time. Skeptical, I declined the invitation to play, but my friend Max was more than eager. Max set up the Ouija board, and they began their supernatural quest. I sat across the room, observing skeptically as they asked questions. receiving yes or no answers from the mysterious board. I thought it was all just a charade until I decided to test it. Silently, without anyone knowing, I started repeating a question in my mind. What's Tanya's middle name? I was nowhere near the board, yet to my astonishment, the planquette began moving rapidly in a figure-8 pattern. Tanya, my girlfriend, asked Max, "What's going on?" He was as baffled as she was. Meanwhile, I kept repeating the question in my head, and the planquette stopped momentarily before resuming its erratic movement. Then, Max, with a bewildered expression, said, "It's spelling out something." Tanya's eyes widened as she saw the letters forming the answer. TDE, she gasped. "That's my middle name." I was left dumbfounded. It seemed the Ouija was far from a mere hoax. The incident piqued my curiosity, so I began experimenting with the Ouija board myself, conducting sessions to unravel its mysteries. To my surprise, it consistently yielded results. However, with each session, the intensity seemed to increase. We'd start by communicating with one spirit, but then other entities would take control of the board. One spirit, in particular, identified itself as AJ, the young boy who had tragically drowned. At first, we considered AJ a friendly presence. But after a few months, AJ's responses turned darker and more malevolent. He became vulgar and sometimes outright hostile. We threatened to end the session if he didn't stop, and that's when things got really bizarre. The planquette would start moving at lightning speed, spelling out all repeatedly until we decided that AJ was throwing a tantrum. We'd hastily say goodbye, stow away the board, and try to forget the unsettling encounters. Eventually, we grew weary of these unsettling interactions. It seemed like every time we summoned the Ouija, AJ would seize control, preventing us from communicating with any other spirits. So, we made a collective decision to stop using it altogether. It was a relief to put the supernatural sessions behind us. As years passed, we gradually became aware of the grave dangers associated with Ouija boards. We learned about the potential for malevolent entities to infiltrate these sessions, and we couldn't help but feel like we had dodged a bullet. That's when our experience took a chilling turn. A couple of years ago, I stumbled upon a chilling revelation. Paranormal investigators had been researching a global phenomenon known as Zozo. This malevolent spirit or demon was allegedly connected to murders and suicides around the world, often making its presence known through Ouija sessions. It seemed to prey on the mental vulnerability of its victims, searching for those it could torment. We felt fortunate that we hadn't fallen prey to Zozo's sinister games, but our encounter with the Ouija board had left a lasting impression. It was a stark reminder that anyone considering using a Ouija board should be aware of the very real and chilling presence that can lurk on the other side. So, if you ever find yourself tempted to dabble with the mystical, remember our cautionary tale. Once upon a chilling winter's night in the heart of Manhattan, there lived a recent Harvard University graduate who had become quite enamored with the city's bustling streets. The year was 1942, and World War II raged on in distant Europe. Like any responsible citizen, he faithfully followed the daily headlines and did his utmost to support the brave soldiers overseas. As he stood at a street corner, clutching his jacket tightly to ward off the bitter cold, he couldn't help but wonder where his enlisted friends might be stationed on that frigid evening. He hoped, with all his heart, that they were safe, yet an eerie shiver ran down his spine, one not solely attributed to the biting chill in the air. Amidst the dazzling, neon-lit panorama of Times Square, his attention was abruptly seized by two figures. These men, adorned in the distinguished uniforms of the Royal Air Force of England, were unmistakably on lead, with a sense of camaraderie for fellow servicemen. He exchanged nods and smiles with them. The taller of the two Brits, in a crisp British accent, posed a somewhat touristy question. Is this Times Square? Suppressing a smile, he confirmed their location. As the traffic light changed, the trio began to walk together, engaging in friendly conversation. They wandered through the electric streets of Times Square. The raft pilots, clearly thrilled to be in this vibrant setting after enduring the horrors of war, didn't delve into the harrowing details of their wartime experiences. He, in turn, didn't press them. Instead, he reveled in their genuine delight, though he couldn't help but notice the frequent glances they cast at their watches. Curiosity finally got the best of him, and he asked if they had somewhere important to be. Without hesitation, he extended an invitation for them to dine at the Harvard Club, an offer the raft pilots eagerly accepted. They promptly headed to the prestigious Harvard Club, where they dined at a leisurely pace and exchanged stories late into the night. The raft pilots proved to be excellent company, regaling their host with tales that, while captivating, skirted around their wartime experiences throughout the evening. However, they continued to check their watches with increasing frequency. As midnight loomed, the raft pilots excused themselves from the table, expressing gratitude for an unforgettable evening. Just as they were about to leave, the tall pilot turned back with a cryptic revelation. They had always yearned to visit Times Square, but had never had the chance. It was, he added ominously, an unfulfilled dream that had to wait until after their untimely deaths, killed in action. Their plane shot down over Berlin the night before. The color drained from their host's face, his eyes widened in disbelief, and his mouth hung agape in shock. The phantom raft pilot cast a sardonic smile before nodding to his comrade, and with an eerie grace, they vanished into thin air right before the astounded man's eyes. The clock struck midnight, sealing the inexplicable encounter with an otherworldly shiver.